What's going on, guys? Happy Thanksgiving! We're already here at the Thanksgiving games, man. This is like a pivotal moment in the season where you're like, all right, we're knee deep into fantasy football. Everyone's spending time with their families, but all they really care about is their fantasy lineups
Right.
on Thursday. All the guys who are in fantasy leagues, at your Thanksgiving, dinner or lunch or whatever all day long, they're going to be stressed all day because all they care about is whether their guy scored a touchdown, how their guy's doing, any chance they get away from the TV, whether they're at their dinner table, if there's no TV there, they're going to be wondering what's going on in the back of their mind. So if you see anybody just kind of, check out while you're having a conversation with them, it's because they're trying to figure out what happened in the game. Okay, and that's the reality of it.
Remember it's not the 3 F's of Thanksgiving. It's the 4 F's. It's food, family, football, and fantasy football. That's how it actually works. At least that's how I'm going to be treating it. And I just remember last year. I have a little trauma from last year because I was biting into a turkey leg as DeAndre Swift got hurt. I think it was last year or the year before. I just remember that. It was terrible. DeAndre Swift, he just come back from injury, and then he got hurt again. No, this was with the Lions. It might have been 2 years ago. I don't know. But I still hold on to that trauma. I know the feeling. Like, you completely check out as soon as your player gets hurt on Thanksgiving. Like, that's just the worst feeling ever because you're supposed to be sitting back watching them tear it up while you're eating your food, and it's just terrible. So hopefully that doesn't happen to anybody. But I'm definitely going to be that guy where I'm just sitting there watching the screen. And I don't know. You're probably going to be that way too because we gotta analyze these games then too. Like, we can't just sit here and lay back and be like, this is going to be like, well, we don't take a day off on Thanksgiving.
Well, here's the problem. Here's the problem, right? I'm going to be making the turkey. I'm going to be busy with all that stuff. I'm going to be hosting, with my wife. Our kids are going to be running around. We're going to be trying to figure out how to keep them calm. So we're going to have a lot going on. Now, I'm going to have the TV on in every single room with the games on. Okay, so that's like wherever I walk, we'll have the games on. I'm going to have it loud enough in the room near the kitchen so that I can at least hear the game, right?
Yeah.
And then probably what's going to end up happening is what I normally do is like early Friday morning, I'll hop back into the game, and then we'll record another podcast kind of reviewing that, right, and going over the rest of the game. So that's what we're gonna be doing. We're going to be going over the Turkey Day games and the Black Friday game, and it's going to be a truly Black Friday for the Jets, most likely. And it's happening in New York. No. It's happening in Jersey, obviously, and right next to the mall. So it's going to be a crazy place. I don't want anything to do with that bonanza over there. But a lot of people, it's a hot game. Everyone wants to go because it's so it's a Black Friday game. Like, there's no other games on. Everyone's off. It's one of those games where you could be a shit show of yourself and be okay, and because you still have Saturday the next day. You have a whole weekend to recover.
You're Jets
so
fan,
I totally understand.
You don't have to remember anything afterwards.
No,
you can have a good time at tailgate, something like that. I don't know. What's the weather?
I'm
not even sure.
That's honestly sometimes that's my favorite part of the Jets game. It's the tailgate,
right? Yeah.
And because the game itself gets so depressing. So I want to go over a few pieces of news before we get into the 4 games we'll be covering in this episode, and then also we'll be going over some quarterback streamers in this episode as well. And then Friday morning we'll be back going over running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends going into Sunday. We thought about doing all the games in today's episode, but then, we're kind of realizing that, there's going to be so many injury reports between now and Friday. It's probably a better idea to just, record on Friday, get all the updates, and then go from there. Otherwise, I feel like that's the best way to do it, so we give you guys all the information that you need. So 2 limited practices for Antonio Gibson this week going into Thanksgiving. He didn't practice at all last week, so now if he plays, I don't like Brian Robinson as much, but if Gibson doesn't play, Robinson is still a very strong RB2, despite the tough matchup against the Cowboys. The fact that he caught 13 of 17 targets over the last 2 games is a reason why I'll find it very hard to bench him.
Yeah, I'm relying completely on Antonio Gibson to determine the way I'm going to feel about Brian Robinson in this matchup. I feel like that's all right given what we've seen this season. The past 2 weeks, Gibson doesn't play. Robinson's suddenly a very strong volume-based play. With the receiving game, most of the production has come in the receiving game. He has 18% target share these past 2 weeks from Sam Howell, according to Fantasy Life's utilization report. You can't ignore that, even if it's Brian Robinson. For all the crap I give Brian Robinson, like I said, I've taken over that mantle of being the crap giver to Brian Robinson. But the Commanders go down in this game. Gibson doesn't play. Like, he could be a target funnel again out of the backfield. Like, you can't rule that out. The way that we've seen it the past 2 weeks, it seems pretty black and white with when Gibson plays and doesn't, that Brian Robinson suddenly becomes this good play. But if Gibson does play, then you're looking at Robinson as just an early down back on a pass-first offense. Like, that's not good. You can't rely on that, this week if that's going to be the case, especially if this becomes a negative game script for Washington, which it should, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. Just throwing that out there. If it's a negative game script and Antonio Gibson's playing, we might not see Brian Robinson hauling a bunch of passes. Now, I think it's also a possibility they could catch 3 or 4, but there's going to be next to no work in the ground game if they're just going to be dropping Sam Howell back every play.
Now, it's possible that Geno Smith doesn't play this week. He was limited in practice with the injured elbow. If he doesn't go, it's Drew Lock against the 49ers. Not a pretty sight there. I don't think DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, take a dip to the point where we can't start them. This is a good matchup for them, but they should be downgraded. Like, the 49ers offense, 49ers defense can have Drew Lock, on his ass the entire game, and that would definitely affect these wide receivers for sure. I just think that Geno has a lot more command of the offense where, he can kind of make things happen. So, it also kind of sucks for Charbonnet as well if the offense can't move, right? The hope is that, he would just get peppered in the receiving game at that point, but if Geno plays, like, obviously I like these guys a lot more, but I feel like a lot of decisions are going to be made on whether Geno Smith plays or not.
Yeah, and I hope Geno Smith plays just for the sake of fantasy football and the quality of the game that we're going to watch on Thanksgiving, because at that point, this is the night game. You'll have eaten. You'll be sitting there. You don't want to watch a shitty game. You're going to be like, I want to see an actual game where it's competing, because now this is like, you don't want to, I guess, if Drew Lock plays, it's going to be a very easy game to fall asleep to. Like, I don't know if you've ever had that happen to you, but I've had it happen to me. You eat your food. It's like, okay, you fall asleep. So it's like, totally a possibility if Drew Lock plays that's what you're going to be dealing with. But I'm hoping that Geno Smith plays so we have something interesting to watch. Geno Smith, though, he hasn't been the same guy this year that we saw last year. We could have a whole conversation on that. But given the choice between him and Drew Lock, you'd much rather have Geno. It's pretty obvious that Lock under center would mean that we're playing Lockett and Metcalf just for the volume that they could have. And even in a great matchup against the Niners, that's not going to be good enough. The Niners are allowing the 7th most fantasy points to wide receivers overall, 4th most on Metcalf's side. So it's a good matchup, but you just have to hope that Geno is there to take advantage of that. Lock isn't going to do that for these wide receivers. So for me, I think if Lock is a starter, I think that they downgrade to like mid to high wide receiver 3, both of them in that case, because like you mentioned, you can't just write them off completely, but the downgrade should happen. But if it's Geno, I think we're looking at low wide receiver 2 range, and with a little bit of upside, especially if they can keep it competitive.
Yeah, no, for sure. And that's the game that I would be able to watch, right? Because, like, dinner's basically over. You can kind of hang out. Everyone's just lounging. That's the game that I want to enjoy. So I agree, man. I do hope that Geno Smith is able to play for the sake of a lot of fantasy rosters, but also for the sake of me being able to at least enjoy one game on Thanksgiving. Let me ask you a question, Zach. If you had to choose one side to go with either your turkey or your ham. By the way, is your family a turkey guy or a ham guy, or neither? Or ham family, turkey family, or neither?
We are definitely turkey.
Okay, gotcha.
But this year we switched it up. I changed it. I'm cooking London broil for my family. So
wow,
that could be interesting.
Here
Just
we
throw
go.
that out there. Hopefully it comes out well. I'm putting this on record here. I don't know if my parents listen to this podcast, but I'm cooking for the family, so it should be interesting. But we're doing steak this year, which is, I think, a pretty good upgrade. It's a nice change of pace. Should be good.
Dude, are you kidding me? Thanksgiving we get so much of an upgrade. If the national animal, the official animal that is consumed on Thanksgiving becomes a cow instead of a turkey, that's for damn sure.
Well, part of it also, we're doing another thing on Friday. Like I said, we're doing a turkey there. So it's like we're not going to do turkey back to back. Let's get a little variety in here.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
But
I like it. So if you have to choose a side to go with your turkey, like that one side that you have to have.
I'm a mac and cheese guy. I don't know. Like there's good mac and cheese out there, but like the one that we have, it's like 4 cheese mac and cheese. You put breadcrumbs on it and you bake it. It's like fantastic, really good. So that's what I would go with. What's your side? Like I know there's a lot of people out there. Like stuffing is super popular. I don't know if you're a stuffing guy, but I hear that all the time.
I'm a huge stuffing guy. I love stuffing. You know, there's a lot of jokes that could be made around that, so I'm not going to go there. However, I'm a big stuffing guy. I like mac and cheese as well, but I think the breadcrumbs on top of the mac and cheese is that's a game changer right there, right?
It's
Throw it in the
different.
oven, make sure it's a little toasted. Totally understand. Add a little texture to it, you know.
Yeah.
But then also, you know, I'm a big stuffing guy, so I gotta have my turkey. And this year we're doing our own stuffing, so we're making it from scratch. I bought some bread, you know, we're mixing it up, right? So we got the Italian bread, but we also have the sourdough. Okay, so we're putting two types of breads into
That's what I call homemade. Yeah.
into the stuffing. Hell yeah,
That sounds
All
pretty
right.
great.
Anyway,
We,
moving on.
we should have done
You know,
we should have done like a superlatives thing where we take fantasy players this week and like compare them to our, like, you're building your roster, you build your plate at Thanksgiving. You know what I'm saying? Like, who would be your main course? Like, I'm taking CD
Right.
Lamb as my main course
Right.
here in this week, and we'll talk about him soon. And then you add on a guy like, I don't know, who Jameer Gibbs is like a very good side right now.
Right.
It's interesting. Yeah.
Mac and cheese. Mac and cheese.
He's the mac and cheese, yeah. And the usage that's the breadcrumbs. The extra usage he's getting in the receiving game, that's the breadcrumbs. The Thanksgiving
that.
puns are going to be on today.
I'm trying to figure out for the last like 10 seconds. I've been trying to figure out what superlative we could give to Michael Thomas, because he's been placed on IR.
Green bean
we talked
casserole,
about
you just chuck
green
it
bean
out. Get out of here.
used to be a favorite, not anymore.
Right.
Rashid Shaheed, you know, should be rostered. You know, his rap participation jumped up to 81% in week 10 because of Thomas leaving the game. A.T. Perry, their rookie wide receiver, had an 89% rap participation as well. He can get some work as their new X receiver. Look out for Juwan Johnson as well, who's been back from injury over the past few weeks. His rap participation wasn't all the way back yet before the bye, but we could see that jump up this week. Also, Derek Carr, he's in the concussion protocol, so keep that in mind. Jameis Winston becomes a solid QB2 start in his place. Solid streamer this week. You know, both these guys, I would say, in this matchup. But also, Taysom Hill. He could see an increased role as well if Derek Carr isn't in there, right? You can plug him into your tight end spot in your lineup. So, a lot of moving parts here with the Saints coming out their bye.
Way too many moving parts. It's funny, just one player going down completely changes the whole thing. It's really hilarious, but it's not a small role that Thomas is vacating. You know, we're talking about a guy that had, according to Fantasy Life utilization reports, he had 18% target share this season overall. So obviously we want Thomas to recover quickly, get back out there. You know, he's on IR, he's going to be out for 4 weeks. But I think that this one shall pass in my book for the time being. Just given the way that this Saints offense has been all over the place, there hasn't been a specific, I mean, outside of Alvin Kamara and Chris Olave, there haven't been anybody that you can really rely on a weekly basis. The hope is that maybe Michael Thomas moving out will make guys like Rashid Shaheed more reliable on a week-to-week basis. Because Rashid Shaheed, he's looked good. He just doesn't get that target share. Like I mentioned, if things could be more stratified, that could really make things interesting. If you add a third player to the equation, where we've only had two, like I mentioned, Kamara and Olave, that could really make things interesting. Whether it's Shaheed or Perry that's going to get that extra work, you know, remains to be seen. I'm not sure. If I had to pick one, I would probably lean Shaheed right now. But I think A.T. Perry's also interesting as somebody to pick up off of the waivers because he's going to fill that extra role. And that's what he did last week when Michael Thomas went down. He has the prototypical build to do that, to step in and just take over that role. Like, if you had to pick a receiver for the next 4 weeks between Shaheed and A.T. Perry, who would you pick to have on your roster?
You know, Shaheed, you know, because of the fact that, you know, he's shown the big playability, right? He has that ceiling. He's boom bust for sure. But, you know, he's somebody that can come in and give you 20 points, you know, in good matchups. So that's really what it comes down to. A.T. Perry, I think, should be rostered in, I would say, 14-team leagues. And then, like, in deep bench 12-team leagues, he should be rostered as well. Just to see what happens. Because I think he's a talented, you know, coming out of Wake Forest, I think he was a good X receiver, very solid yards per route run over the past 2 years. I think it was like top 15, top 20 each year, something like that, out of like more than 100 wide receivers, Power 5 wide receivers, I should say. So, you know, somebody to pay attention to, for sure. Aaron Jones has an MCL sprain. He's going to miss the game on Thanksgiving. It's possible that he misses another week. After that, A.J. Dillon, he can clog your lineup in the meantime. You know, not a great matchup. I don't like him in this one against the Lions personally. He's like a RB3 play, flex play for me. You know, I really went into it on yesterday's waiver wire show. Don't need to get into it again. But I'm assuming you don't love AJ Dillon any more than I do.
No, I think I put it pretty clearly in my show notes for today. I think I sent you them. I don't know if you caught it, but I just wrote down as my advice for this week for AJ Dillon: just super glue him to your bench. Like, don't get caught up in him being the lead guy. Remember, like Einstein said that insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. When have you been satisfied with Dillon in your lineup? You haven't, even with Aaron Jones out. So don't be insane. You're going to drive yourself insane when you're sitting there starting off your Thanksgiving. Are you going to be wanting you want to have the very beginning part of your day on Thanksgiving hinge on AJ Dillon? I don't think so. Save yourself all of the trouble. Just leave him on your bench. He's not going to have any type of upside. Just because I'm saying this, he's going to score 2 touchdowns. But the numbers tell us that's not going to be the case. And I'm not very excited about AJ Dillon in this one. Like I said, don't get caught up in him being the lead role. It's not going to change much. I think if anything's going to happen for the Lions, not the Lions, the Packers on offense, it's going to be in the passing game like it's been these past few weeks.
Matt Canada has finally been fired, relieved of his duties as the Steelers' offensive coordinator. This is news we've been waiting to hear for so long. This offense has been dysfunctional. Their concepts have made no sense. Their talented wide receivers had no diversity in their route tree whatsoever, despite someone like Deontay Johnson being able to run every route, win on every route. Let's hope Kenny Pickett can respond to these changes and prove that, I'm not saying that, I don't want to say like it wasn't Kenny Pickett's fault. I want to say that it was Matt Canada's fault, if that makes sense. Because I'm still not bought in on Kenny Pickett's talent, but I think that, he can potentially be an average NFL quarterback if being placed in the right position, right? Yeah. And you see how delicately I'm saying that because I don't trust Pickett that much. But I'm hopeful that the changes that they make now are simple for him to understand and execute, and also effective for the rest of the year.
Right. I think Kenny Pickett, I'm in the same boat as you. I don't know how much I trust Kenny Pickett, but I think that he's also getting a much worse rap than he should be getting, because the magnifying glass on his issues has been the play calling by Matt Canada. It's just been terrible. So him moving out, that's good. Like, I mean, this has to be good news for Steelers offense, right? Like, hopefully this can give them all at least a slight boost. And when I say them all, I mean like every player in the offense. I know that the running backs have been getting it done recently, but just we need to see more in the passing game. That's also going to help the run game. I don't trust Kenny Pickett to support fantasy relevant wide receivers at this point right now. Maybe that can change, but I'll be playing Deontay this week regardless, just because changes in coaching generally translate to the field pretty quickly. We saw that with Devontae Adams and Antonio Pierce in Las Vegas. I think that we can see something similar to that with Deontay Johnson. But this change, it doesn't solve the upside problem that we're going to be staring at the rest of the way for Pittsburgh. Like, the offense isn't going to turn on a dime and suddenly be good. George Pickens isn't going to suddenly explode and become this, wide receiver one. Same with Deontay Johnson. But I think that there is room for improvement here, especially compared to what we've seen these past few weeks. Let's just put it this way. Johnson isn't going to suddenly, be back as a reliable wide receiver 2 that he's been throughout his career in his offense, even with the changes. But I think that it's worth giving him another look, giving them another chance with a new offensive coordinator here at this point. So the only way to go from here is up. I'm putting Johnson in my lineup, but if things don't improve, I wouldn't be surprised, and I wouldn't be opposed to potentially holding these guys out of my lineup. Given especially with some matchups down the line that could be tough, I wouldn't be opposed to kind of just like phasing them out. They might become bench players. So I'm tempering my expectations.
Kyren Williams is expected to play this week, and the fact that Sean McVay said before the bye that Kyren was expected to be back in Week 12 when he's first eligible tells me that he's as close to 100% as he'll be. And I'm expecting him to be that RB1 that he was before he got hurt. Okay, they released Darrell Henderson. Thank you for your services. And now they go up against the Cardinals, who Williams went off against before he got hurt. 158 rushing yards, partly on a bum ankle. Right? Like, they didn't realize he had a high ankle sprain until after the game. The Cardinals have allowed the third most fantasy points to running backs over the last 4 weeks, the third most over the course of the season. They've allowed the most rushing touchdowns to running backs over the last 4 weeks as well. Put him in your lineup. Don't overthink it.
Yeah. And the fact that they just straight up released Darrell Henderson, like you said, immediately, as soon as he's Williams is eligible to return, it just tells me that they have no questions about his health at this point. It seems like he's going to be 100%. There's a chance that Cooper Kupp could miss a game too on Sunday. He's a little questionable with that low ankle sprain. I think that's what they're calling it. that could mean more work on the ground for Williams in his first game back. I also expect him to hit the ground running, get back to being the bell cow in LA. He's got a solid floor with real upside and a great matchup, like you mentioned. Devin Singletary just trounced the Cardinals last week. And the week before, Bijan Robinson had his best game in a long time against them. So this is clearly a soft defense. Kyren Williams can take advantage of it. It looks like the Rams are just content to put him right back into that bell cow role, run him into the ground, and that's fantastic news for fantasy managers. So I'm all in here on Kyren Williams. I think I'm going to have him ranked as an RB1. I forget exactly where I have him right now. I think he is a low RB1 for me, with upside, though. I'll put it that way. The context there, he does have upside this week in a good matchup.
All right, let's hit these 4 games before Sunday. We have the Packers and Lions, then the Cowboys and Commanders, and the Seahawks and 49ers. Let's start with the Packers and Lions. On the Packers side, A.J. Dillon will be the starter. Tough matchup. The Lions are allowing 3.5 yards per carry to running backs. That's the 3rd fewest in the NFL. They've allowed the 5th fewest fantasy points per game to running backs as well. Not great, okay? Yeah. I do think the matchup for Jordan Love isn't bad, though, so he's a solid streamer for me. If he can move the ball a bit, maybe Dillon can see some carries near the goal line that could save his day. Whatever.
That's what we'll come down to.
Are you cool? Are you cool playing Jordan Love in this one if you need a quarterback?
Yeah, the matchup isn't ideal, but I'm perfectly fine just playing him as a second QB, in Superflex leagues. I think he's a really solid streamer. I mean, that's what he's been for the most part, in every game he's played so far, besides that 3-interception debacle in Las Vegas before the bye. But since that bye, he's averaging 17 points a game, 4 top 15 finishes in the past 5 weeks. Can't really, knock him for that. He's one of those players where, they're not that good in real life. If you watch him on Sunday, it's like, this guy is not good. You just look at the team, the way they're playing, he's not good. He did beat the Chargers, but who didn't beat the Chargers this year? As a fantasy quarterback, though, he can get it done. And I also think that last week for Lions showed that they're not infallible. The Bears are an objectively bad team, and they took the Lions to the edge last week. I think the Packers, they're still plenty scrappy. I think they have the potential to do the same thing tomorrow, and that means Jordan Love is going to have to play serviceable football, and I think he's perfectly capable of coming through in a pinch. So the way that Jordan Love has been producing, he has been consistently a mid to low QB2, and if you need him to start for you this week, there's nothing wrong with that. He has shown some upside as well, because it looks like the passing game is getting its feet underneath it again a little bit these past 2 weeks. You're using Jaden Reed, which is he's an interesting play this week as well.
Yeah, I have Love as my QB 12 in the week. The Lions have given up the 6th most fantasy points to quarterbacks this year. And you mentioned Jaden Reed. He was placed on the injury report with a chest injury. As long as he plays, I think he's the preferred Packers wide receiver for me at this point. We talked about it on the waiver wire show yesterday. 2 top 12 finishes in a row. Should have you considering him if you need somebody. He's a low-end wide receiver 3 play for me. And Romeo Doubs is like a flex play. Touchdown dependent, basically. You're hoping he finds the end zone like he's had in 4 of his last 5 games. Now, on the Lions side, Jahmyr Gibbs is an RB1 play, right? The matchup is great. His usage is great. Don't overthink it. He's in your lineup. David Montgomery, remember, it was the Packers who against them, he had his 32 carry, 3 touchdown performance against in week 4. And the Lions weren't even at home. They're at home for this one. Not saying that he has that type of upside anymore, but he should still be in lineups as well. I have him as my RB12 on the week this week, so I'm pretty high on him.
Yeah, I would be too. Like, just look at the way that this running back room has shaken out these past 4 weeks. Like, this is the split in the Lions backfield that we were all begging for earlier in the season, and we finally have it. Jahmyr Gibbs should be able to overcome any limitations in the ground game with work in the receiving game. He had a low carry total last week, but he was able to overcome that, and I think that we can continue to expect him to do that moving forward. We know the type of talent he is. And if you're going to be a touchdown-dependent, early down running back like Dave Montgomery is, like, I think Detroit is about the best place you can be in that role for fantasy. Like, it's like the Najee Harris, Jaylen Warren situation on steroids, plus Dave Montgomery. He's just efficient on all of his touches. They're both very good running backs. I don't think that there's a way that you can hold either of them out of your lineup at this point. Like, you're not going to overthink it and be like, okay, well, this might be a Jahmyr Gibbs game, so I'm going to pull Dave Montgomery out. You probably don't have both of them, but the 2 managers that have these Lions running backs are going to be putting them in their lineup every single week, because both of them have RB1 upside every single week. I do think that both of them have astronomical upside, very solid floors. Everyone's a happy camper right now with the Lions running backs. I think that there are cases moving forward. We might see Jahmyr Gibbs take over a game here or there. We might see Dave Montgomery take over a game here or there. Because if Dave Montgomery scores 2 touchdowns in a game, that probably means Jahmyr Gibbs is having a quieter game. But I think they're both good enough to the point where you're not going to have any problem starting them. It's also worth noting that Jahmyr Gibbs has been on an absolute tear these past 4 weeks. Just throwing this one out there. Overall RB1 in points per game since week 7. Like, that's the talent that we were telling you to draft. It didn't happen in the first few weeks, but now he's got everything working in his favor. This is exactly what we were looking for Gibbs, and hopefully you were able to hold on to him during that slow stretch to start the season.
What about Jared Goff? He had a tough time against the Bears at home last week. He has another divisional game this week. Are we trusting him again as a low end QB1?
I think so. I'm not going to let what was obviously just an off game for the Lions overall just cloud my judgment of Goff moving forward. It was his first multi-interception game of the season, but even then, he was able to turn things around, save the day for his fantasy managers. I think he had 16 points, so like that's perfectly serviceable. And in a matchup you could say he played really badly in, I think that's pretty good. It looks like he's going to be able to do that on a weekly basis. He's one of the most consistent producers at the position this year. I think that type of production is what you drafted him for. Jared Goff, you weren't really chasing this huge ceiling, but you were chasing that consistent, solid floor with a little bit of upside. And with the number of weapons surrounding him, you can't really say he doesn't have that upside. Green Bay is only allowing the 7th fewest fantasy points QBs this season, but the Lions' offense is good enough to overcome that, if you ask me. Plus, in 2 Thanksgiving Day games with the Lions, Goff has thrown 2 touchdowns in both over the past 2 seasons. So clearly he has a thing. He can play on Thanksgiving. There's just a little, statistic out there because it's Thanksgiving. But I think it's a pretty safe number to assume in this matchup that he could hit two passing touchdowns, especially given that this is, a really great supporting cast. Jahmyr Gibbs could take anything in the house at any time. Amon-Ra St. Brown. Sam Laporta has been quiet. He might be due for a touchdown this week, too.
You're starting Amon-Ra. You're stashing Jamison Williams. And Sam Laporta, 2 down games, like you mentioned, out of the bye. Packers are a neutral matchup for tight ends. I think he's the lowest in my rankings for all the must-start tight ends, like the Trey McBrides, the George Kittles, the Dalton Kincaids. I do have him over Jake Ferguson and Dalton Schultz, though. Does that sound about right to you?
Yeah, I mean, the targets have come down a bit since the bye for Sam Laporta, but at the price of Jahmyr Gibbs being fancy relevant and having a substantial role in the passing game, is Sam Laporta being a low tight end one as opposed to being a high tight end one, I think I'll happily take that trade off. McBride and Kincaid, they're the 2 target share warriors right now. They're getting a bunch of targets, and it's great to see that, like we mentioned last week with the tight end position, it's thin as it's been for a long time. Especially Mark Andrews going down, that's going to make things even more difficult. So those tight ends are going to be moving up the rankings even more. But I also agree that Laporta needs to be higher than Ferguson and Schultz because A, what we're expecting from the Cowboys this week, which we'll get into, and B, just a really volatile week-to-week target share for Dalton Schultz. Like, he's scoring touchdowns, but his production over the past 2 weeks has felt a bit too efficient given his utilization. Just a couple targets last week, he scored that touchdown, saved his fantasy day. Laporta is still being consistently utilized, even if the production hasn't followed these past 2 weeks. And I'd rather bet on production for Sam Laporta catching up to the utilization that he's getting than overproduction, like on Dalton Schultz's part, to continue unlimited work.
Yeah, no, I totally understand that. And by the way, guys, our full positional rankings and flex rankings are available on our website. It'll be updated daily throughout the week, and then all the way into Sunday morning. Okay, so that's upperhandfantasy.com for those rankings and a lot more. And also, guys, like if you have players going on Thanksgiving and you're not sure if they're going to play on Sunday, obviously the safe thing to do is just to go with the guy who's playing on Thanksgiving, right? Like, because you're like, oh man, like, is Devon Achane going to play? Like, I have Brian Robinson and I really want to play Achane, but Gibson's not playing. Should I just play Robinson? It's like, yeah, probably you should, right? And because we don't know if Devon Achane is going to play. Now, we just got a little bit of an update from Mike McDaniel saying that Devon Achane is going to practice today. My assumption will be it's a limited practice, especially since it's a Wednesday. We'll see. Actually, no, they play on Friday, right? So today's practice is going to determine what happens on Friday. So you'll probably get an update on that. But a lot of guys who are playing on Sunday, you might not get an update for them. So to play it safe, you might just want to play the guys on Thanksgiving. Not play. I was going to say play with the guys on Thanksgiving. That's not what I meant to say. Play them on Thanksgiving. Let's hit the commit.
Oh, just a question. You talk about just quick. It's just because it's Thanksgiving. We're talking about playing with the guys. That sounds bad. Do you have like a turkey bowl that you play?
I used to, man.
Do you ever have like a game?
It's making me feel old, but like I used to play every Thanksgiving morning, like with the guys. Every morning we used to play football.
Really? Now, how many years did that go?
Oh my god, it was going on for 10. No, nothing like that. It was just like bragging rights. 10+ years though, man. Like it's been a long time.
That's crazy.
Long time.
Yeah, I haven't had that in a little while. I mean, since like COVID. Like, obviously, I was much younger. I was probably 15, 16. The last time that we played that, but COVID happened, and it's like we stopped doing it. It's like we need to get that going again. Turkey Bowl definitely has to happen. But I was just curious because like that's another thing I forgot because like that's how you wake up in the morning, you play in the Turkey Bowl, and that like transports you to watching football.
Yeah,
You miss all of the setup before that, all that
it was the
stuff.
best.
And I'm sure because you're setting stuff up, you're planning, you're hosting. It's much different, much more difficult to have any type of Turkey Bowl because you get
Yeah,
played when
well,
you're setting up.
also it's like I don't live near my childhood friends anymore, right? Like I live in New Jersey now. When I lived in New York, in Queens, like all of us used to just walk to the park.
Yeah,
Like
that's fair.
we would, like there'll be like 20 of us, 25 of us walking, especially for Thanksgiving. You know, we would play almost every weekend sometimes during football season. Like we'll play on Sunday morning
Yeah.
also. So we're playing tackle football, like with no pads, nothing.
That's
like
freaking great.
it was intense, dude. People getting hurt all the time, but we didn't care, man. It was so much fun.
Do you have to put out
I would
injury
play wide
reports
receiver,
in between
quarterback, and
weeks?
safety.
For us, it's questionable.
Yeah, pretty much, man.
That's
pretty much.
hilarious.
Some people got like really hurt, and we probably got concussions, all that. Like who knows? Like,
Yeah.
but you know, we used to play, and on Thanksgiving, that's when everybody came out, right? And then we would probably have to go to a different field, maybe drive over to a different field because we needed a bigger field, right? But yeah, like every single year, like I don't know, from the ages of maybe we were like 14 up until like mid college, maybe like we were probably like 20, 21, 22 maybe when when we kind of stopped, But like yeah, like in Queens, we just walked to the park, you know. We would go to Cunningham Park in Queens, or we would go to
Testing your knowledge of your own
Flushing
lore.
Meadows. Flushing Meadows Park. Oh man, it was the best. It was
crazy.
the best, man. But thanks for bringing that up because really, really good memories. We, I used to love playing football on Sundays. Love playing football on Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
It was the absolute best, man. But not anymore. Now I'm a responsible dad, an adult, and husband and caretaker. That's what I
Yes.
do now. So it's a completely different life.
Much cooler job,
Which,
I'm sure.
No, not really. No. It was so much more fun.
Yeah.
It was so much more fun to play football on Sundays. All right, let's hit this Commanders-Cowboys game. Cowboys are 11-point favorites in this one at home. The matchup on paper, absolutely ridiculous for Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb. I have Dak as my QB1 on the week. I have CeeDee Lamb as my wide receiver 1 on the week. You can also play Brandon Cooks if you want as well. We don't see any reason why the Cowboys would take their foot off the gas. They've had their opportunities to do that in the past, and they haven't. Okay, Washington is one of the worst teams against wide receivers. Cooks can take advantage after the rapport we saw a couple games ago. I have him as a low-end wide receiver 3, but just overall, like this passing attack can absolutely go apeshit.
Yeah.
And
It feels almost too good to be true, doesn't it? Like every time I look at this, I'm like,
yeah, it does.
this is too perfect a matchup. I think we're like setting them up with this huge alley-oop, and we're expecting them to slam dunk this
Right.
thing. Like they have to. How does the hottest fantasy quarterback and the hottest fantasy wide receiver walk into a matchup like this against the Commanders on Thanksgiving? It's at home. Like Dallas has straight up dominated their opponents over the past 4 weeks at home. They played 2 games. Dak has scored 39 plus fantasy. Not Dak. Scored 29 plus fantasy points in 2 home games the past 2 times they played at home. CeeDee Lamb has 39 plus fantasy points in each of their past 2 home games. Like the Commanders are allowing the 3rd most fantasy points, like you mentioned, to receivers, the most points to quarterbacks. The Thanksgiving puns, they're all very strongly warranted in this one. If Dak Prescott isn't carving up the Commanders with CeeDee Lamb before he carves up his Thanksgiving turkey after the game, like there's going to be a riot. If Tommy DeVito can throw 3 touchdowns against the Commanders on the road, then Dak Prescott better have 6 touchdowns this week. And like you mentioned, I'm a big fan of Brandon Cooks this week as an upside flex play. Still don't want to trust him as like that wide receiver 3 just yet because I think the target share, he has 1 game where he's had like a legit target share. Outside of that, he hasn't been targeted that much. Don't expect another 30-point performance like he had 2 weeks ago against the Giants. But all it's going to take is a touchdown against Commanders for him to make good on you putting him in your lineup. Like I said, that's why I like him as a flex. So he obviously has a bunch of upside. But if CeeDee Lamb and Dak Prescott aren't scoring a ton of points while I'm sitting there eating my dinner, like, I'm going to be pissed. Double pissed because I'm also a Cowboys fan.
There you go. And the matchup for Jake Ferguson isn't necessarily amazing, but his route participation has been above 80% in 4 of his last 5 weeks. He's had a tight end 1 finish in 3 of his last 4 games. So I think it's a solid tight end 1 this week. But I mentioned, excuse me, I'm playing the normal must start tight ends plus Dalton Schultz over him this week. Who would you start between him and Dalton Schultz this week?
I would probably go with Dalton Schultz. And when I kind of alluded to it earlier, like Jake Ferguson, I want to say he's going to do well, but assuming CeeDee Lamb is cooking and Dak Prescott's throwing it well. I don't think not Dalton Schultz, Jake Ferguson is going to be one of those guys where it's just like being dialed into. Like Brandon Cooks, we saw that happen the last time. I think there's a better chance that Brandon Cooks out targets Jake Ferguson right now than there is the other way around. So for me, I think it makes sense to have Dalton Schultz over him this week.
Yeah. Tony Pollard finally caught a touchdown. No, well, he scored a touchdown last week. Finally. How do you feel about him going into this matchup?
I think it's going to take a lot of things going wrong in the passing game for Pollard to finish as an RB1 this week. A lot would have to go wrong. Like we saw him come through last week in a matchup that was clearly geared towards him in the Panthers. They were pretty stingy on the back end, but they're soft in run defense, and Tony Pollard was able to come through. But as we've seen since Dallas has come out of the bye, and you mentioned this earlier, why take your foot off the gas? They're a pass-first offense right now, and if the passing game isn't working, if the passing game is working, there's not really going to be any need to run the ball. They're not going to over-prioritize giving the ball to Tony Pollard if the passing game's on fire. There's no winning situation for Pollard in this one in terms of the game script unless it's competitive throughout. And if Dallas goes up early, he's going to be standing on the sideline in the fourth quarter. There's touchdown upside here, but like you mentioned, the Cowboys are 11-point favorites. It would take a titanic meltdown on the Cowboys' part for Pollard to be the center of the offense. That would mean that the game's close, and that wouldn't be good news overall. His workload has been that of a running back complementary to a passing game that's on fire. He hasn't had more than 15 carries since week 3. He's a mid RB2 in my book, maybe a low RB2 at this point, just based on the utilization. Last week was his first real, solid game in the past 4 or 5 weeks. So I'm not trusting him too much. The way that the Cowboys offense is geared right now, it's pass-first offense. Tony Pollard isn't going to be the center of attention.
Yeah, I have him as my RB18 on the week, so solid RB2 for me. It's worth noting that Rico Dowdle hasn't practiced this week with an ankle injury. It's possible that he doesn't play in this one, but we'll see. He's probably going to have a questionable tag going into the game, but we'll see what happens there.
Yep.
On the Commander side, we talked about Brian Robinson already, but Terry McLaurin, don't love him this week. They're probably going to be passing a lot, but if they get into a negative game script, that pass rush is going to go apeshit, against Washington.
Yeah.
Already a team that gets sacked a ton. I have downgraded McLaurin to a wide receiver 3, and I kind of want to stay away from both Curtis Samuel and Jahan Dotson this week.
What are you thinking for Sam Howell, though? I'm interested because he's going to be dropping back a lot, and he's probably going to be pass first, and he's had a solid fantasy floor. He's the current QB3 right now in terms of total points. Obviously, he's played all 11 games, so that's kind of a little misleading. But the same thing goes for his points per game. He's doing fine, 19 points per game. Like, where are you standing with Sam Howell in this one? Like, I'm sure there's a world where he doesn't come through if the Cowboys can dominate them. But there's also it'll be a negative game script. He'll be throwing the ball a lot. Like, is there something to be had with the potential volume here? Do you think?
Yeah, there can be. I'm just worried that he's going to be on his ass all the entire game. That's my only worry here. Otherwise, I think he can get it done. Now, I have him as a QB2 this week, like a solid QB2. So I have him pretty down in the ranks this week personally.
Right.
So I don't have a whole lot of confidence in him just because this Dallas defense is that good. His weapons also have tough matchups. So I'm a little bit worried about Howell in this one. So me personally, I think I'm looking for another option.
All right, that makes sense because I have him in our league, so I'm probably going to end up starting him just out of necessity. But thank you, I appreciate the advice.
Yeah, and the vote of confidence.
Yes.
49ers and Seahawks. We mentioned that Geno might not play, and how that can affect these wide receivers. We want Geno to play so that this game has a chance of being competitive. But obviously, on the other side, CMC is in. Brandon Ayuk is in as a solid wide receiver, too. Not the best matchup in the world for him, but he should be in your lineup. The Seahawks have done pretty well against wide receivers lately. Deebo Samuel, I have him as my wide receiver 28 on the week. Kind of low. But just remember that, first of all, every wide receiver is playing this week, right? There are no teams on bye. So that changes the rankings significantly, but only 4 targets in the last 2 weeks. Yes, he can get some usage in the red zone and the run game and all that. You're kind of depending on that, though. 3 catches and 1 carry, 4 catches and 3 carries over the last 2 weeks. Not the best usage in the world.
No,
for him.
I don't think that there would be any type of discussion about having him ranked any higher, let alone this high. If this wasn't Deebo Samuel we were talking about. The talent's there.
Right.
Don't get it wrong. The offense is very good, but it's clear at this point that Purdy has 2 preferred targets over Deebo, in the pecking order, and Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle. And you can even lump Christian McCaffrey in there because all 3 of them have a higher target share than Deebo's 18% target share of the season. I don't think that's enough, just saying, okay, well, Deebo Samuel is this great talent. He is, but I don't think you can hang your hat on that at this point with the quiet games that he's had, and then also just like you mentioned, utilization not being there. You look at CMC, he has 19% target share in the season. Kittle's at 21%. Ayuk's at 27%. Like, I don't think this feels low for him at all based on what we've seen. So if you take out the context of this is Deebo Samuel, you look at the numbers, just get rid of any bias that you might have because of the name value. And this is a receiver that probably would be a lot lower.
Yeah, no, 100%. The reason why he's not is because Kyle Shanahan likes to use him on end rounds and runs near the goal line.
Right.
That's pretty much why I have him this high. What about Brock Purdy? Like, is he a solid QB1 for you this week? Like, would you rather start him or would you rather start Jared Goff?
I'm going to go with Purdy here. And the thing is, these are two very, very similar fantasy quarterbacks. Their ceilings aren't monumental, but they're both getting it done every week at a high level. Purdy's on a hot streak, whereas Goff, he's hit some bumps in the road recently. He's overcome them, but I still trust Purdy more in this matchup against the Seahawks. In 2 games against the Seahawks in his career, including the playoffs, Purdy's averaging 25 points per game. I think that there's another game where the 49ers just dominate throughout. The way that Purdy's been playing, 6 touchdowns, no picks. He's passed 2 games, 3 touchdowns in each of them. Like, he's back on it after a rough stretch, after going 5-0. Of course, the last time they beat the Cowboys in 3 straight losses. He didn't look very good. He's back to doing his thing. He's getting the ball to his playmakers, Brandon Ayuk, George Kittle, like you mentioned. Everything's firing on all cylinders. I like the matchup more. I think that there's a higher ceiling to be had, especially if Geno Smith plays. I think the Seahawks have a better chance of keeping things competitive with the 49ers than the Packers have with the Lions. Because if the Lions go up, they're not going to have to rely on Jared Goff to throw the ball. They're not going to have to push the ball downfield. And the Lions are built to use their running backs more, just in general, where that might not necessarily be passes coming from Jared Goff. It might be Jared Goff handing it to the running backs. They're doing their work in the ground game. He doesn't get points for that. Purdy is going to be throwing the ball. He's been super efficient. I like Purdy this week over Goff.
Let's hit this Jets-Dolphins matchup. On the Jets side, you're playing Breece Hall. We have Tim Boyle as the Jets quarterback. We have no idea what to expect here. But we do hope that he just targets the crap out of Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall. That's his only job, okay? As far as we're concerned, that's his only job. The last time he started games was at the end of the 2021 season. 2 games there. Amon-Ra St. Brown went 8 for 111 and a touchdown, and then 9 for 91 and a touchdown. So, yes, I'm saying there's a chance for Garrett Wilson to come through. Tim Boyle is not a good quarterback. Don't get it twisted. So this is, it's just hope at this point. So Garrett, it did downgrade him a little bit. He's my wide receiver 24 on the week. That's pretty low for him. Breece Hall is my RB9 on the week. They're going to depend on him. My hope is that he gets the targets. This is not the easiest matchup in the world for him either. But, as long as he's being used in the receiving game, I think he should be good enough.
Yeah, someone's going to have to be catching passes from Tim Boyle. And Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall should be the ones that are doing that. If they don't do that, it's going to be a really big issue if they don't just force the ball to them at this point. I know you're not expecting the Jets to compete in this game. The Dolphins have been pretty good on defense since Jalen Ramsey came back. They've been pretty darn good. I forget the exact numbers, but it's been much improved on defense. I think that Garrett Wilson, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt, even though I think last week so much went wrong for the Jets that it's easy to just buy into that, okay, well, we're screwed the rest of the season. But for 4 weeks before last week, Zach Wilson was making Garrett Wilson fantasy relevant. Breece Hall has been fantasy relevant through all of this. The upside hasn't necessarily been there the past 2 weeks, but he had 2 20-point games before that. So I think you don't want to get hung up on what we saw last week. Like you mentioned, Tim Boyle, I'm not saying that this is some guy that's going to be able to come in and consistently produce and make these guys fantasy relevant, but you don't want to just throw it completely out the window. Last week was just tough against the Bills. The Bills looked like the Bills that we expected them to play like in the first game against the Jets in the second game. So I think that there is obviously upside here to the point where they're going to be fantasy relevant. I don't think wide receiver 24 is that crazy for Garrett Wilson this week.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a downgrade. Like you mentioned, a little bit of a tough matchup now. But also, like you mentioned, the previous 4 weeks before last week, right? Wide receiver 14, wide receiver 16, wide receiver 12, wide receiver 14. Those were his finishes. Okay, so he finishes in the top 16 4 weeks in a row. You can't ask for more than that, right?
Given the situation.
So we're hoping that could be a similar thing moving forward. But I need to see.
It just shows it's not impossible. That's the thing. And I think a lot of people are, like I said, are getting hung up on that matchup last week where it's just like, you hit rock bottom. But the thing about rock bottom, the only way to go is up. And I think it's going to be much better this week. Even if it's not, it might not be a top 15, 16 finish. But like you said, like it could be a wide receiver 2 finish. It could be a high wide receiver 3 finish. I don't think he's going to be completely leaving you out to dry with 0 points in the game log like he did last week.
On the other side of the ball, you're starting Tyreek Hill. Jalen Waddle is my wide receiver 26 on the week. He gets downgraded because of the matchup. I also don't really like Tua, by the way. Like, he's way down in my rankings. But I'm back in on Devon Achane if he plays. Like, this is a tough matchup for the Dolphins overall. But when you have Mike McDaniel scheming up plays, when you have Tyreek Hill, doing what he does, like, anything is possible, right,
Yep.
for this offense to move the ball. So Achane is a solid RB2 for me if he plays, because I'm not sure if they unleash him, given him, re-injuring that same knee. But he is playable for me if he's active. How do you feel about that situation if he's active, and where does Mostert fit in? And also talk about Mostert if Achane does not go.
Okay, so if Achane's active, you have to play him. Like, sorry. I know you might be like, well, there might be training wheels in this situation, and he might not be 100%. But if you're going to put him in, it doesn't take 10, 20. It doesn't take 15 or 20 touches for Achane to make a mark. He could have one play and save you your week. He's one of those players. He's just lightning in a bottle. He could have 3 or 4 touches. That's what it was to begin the season before he got that heavy workload in the game against Denver. Obviously, that was an outlier, but still, he had that 51 point performance. And then the week after that, he had 27 points. So I don't think you need him to have a huge workload to make him serviceable, especially if you're putting him in your lineup as a flex. If you have him as a flex, I'm perfectly fine with that. I think that the upside is so good right there that even if he doesn't play full complement of snaps, or even like a substantial amount of snaps, he can still get it done for you. The way that, like you mentioned, Mike McDaniel uses these running backs, they're all threats to score at any time. If he doesn't play, or let's see, you asked about Mostert. Are you asking if he doesn't play, or if he does play, you want both?
No, well, Mostert's going to play most likely, right?
Yeah, we know he's going to play.
And by the way, Salvin Ahmed was put on IR.
Yep.
So he's done. Jeff Wilson will be the 3rd string running back now. So what happens? Like, how are you treating Mostert if Achane ends up being out in this game?
He's going to be probably looking at him as a mid to high RB2, because I think there are a lot of other running backs,
that sounds about right.
definitely starting this week that you'd rather start. The matchup isn't fantastic because the Jets are just very good on defense. That's just the way it is. And you mentioned being low on Tua. I don't think it's crazy to be low on Tua, because I don't think he's a quarterback that's, I don't want to say he's not capable of ascending and rising to the occasion against a very tough defense, but I think he could definitely, get flustered against very good defense. And the Jets are a very good defense. So I don't think it's bad to have him that low. But with Mostert, like I said, I think a high RB2. I don't think the ceiling is much higher, because this is a tough defense. And I do think if anybody's going to be moving the ball in the Jets, it's going to be Tyreek Hill. He is truly matchup proof. So given if Achane doesn't play, Mostert's going to be a high RB2. I think even if Achane does play, it's still going to be relatively the same. I might have Mostert as like a mid RB2. I don't think he gets that much of a downgrade, because I do think that they might take things slow with Achane. But like I mentioned, it doesn't take more than 5 or 6 touches for Achane to make his mark in a game. So I would be comfortable starting him even in that situation.
Yeah, and Tua was my QB 15 on the week, so it's pretty low there. And then Justin Herbert, another tough matchup against Baltimore. 2 solid QB1s who have outside my top 12 this week. I'm okay with starting Herbert, but I might be looking for other options, because there are some streamers, available, right? And we'll get on those in a second. But I want to talk about some quarterbacks now, moving forward. Now, I think we've hit on everything for these games before Sunday. And I want to hit on some quarterbacks, okay? I think Lamar Jackson has a great shot at a good game this week. I think, last week was a good reason why I wasn't panicking on Lamar, personally. Like, in a solid matchup, he was fine. And then this week, the matchup is great. And you should not think twice about starting him, like a lot of people were going into Thursday Night Football against Cincinnati last week.
Right. Yeah, I'm with you on this one. Lamar Jackson, I think, we called it. I think I said something about it 2 weeks ago. It was on one of the trade episodes. I said you should buy Lamar Jackson because he's this low, this stretch of low scoring games. They had those tough matchups, like you mentioned. It was going to come to an end at some point. And I think even though he had that good game against Cincinnati, like I still think that's just scraping the surface. He only had 2 passing touchdowns, that kind of thing. Granted, Mark Andrews is out now, so it should be interesting to see how things shake out. I don't think it's going to affect Lamar Jackson to a point where it's like moving him down the rankings, but I do think that we saw a flash, not necessarily a flash, but we saw more of what we can expect for him moving forward. He's got a good matchup this week against the Chargers. He's on bye in week 13, unfortunately. But then he also gets Jacksonville. He gets a couple good matchups down the stretch. He's going to be a fine quarterback the rest of the way, especially both for making the push into the playoffs and also once you're in the playoffs. So we saw this one coming. I'm okay with Lamar Jackson moving forward. I think that we're going to see more games like that. His touchdowns came down a lot the past couple of weeks, but I think that regression should be coming the way that he's been playing.
Yeah, 100%. Patrick Mahomes wasn't able to come through big time against the Eagles, even though it was such a good matchup. Why? Because he doesn't have any wide receivers to take advantage of the great matchup, right? Like, so you got to expect Josh Allen to have a big game here against this secondary. Stephon Diggs' big bounce back game is coming this week. Okay, Gabe Davis is in play. Khalil Shakir is in play. Again, the Eagles are allowing the most fantasy points to wide receivers this year. The Eagles allowing the most fantasy points to slot wide receivers this year. So that bodes well for Shakir, who has had a 70% or greater route participation over the last 4 weeks, according to FantasyLife.com's utilization report. And he's finished as the top 25 receiver in 3 of those 4 weeks, including the top 10 finish that he just had this past week. Yeah. Okay, so this passing offense is set up nicely heading into their bye.
Yeah, and you can't say much more about it with the matchup. It's just the Eagles are getting torched in the secondary. Patrick Mahomes, like you said, just ridiculous. That whole point where it's like, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, please catch that pass. Justin Watson, same thing. He
seriously.
It could have been,
but it was a bad pass. Zach,
yeah, bad pass. Yeah, and Tyreek Hill went on Twitter and said, yeah, it's difficult to make that catch in the lights. Yes, I'll give him that. But I'm not getting paid millions to do it.
Bullshit.
It's Marquez Valdez-Scantling. You're getting paid. He's getting paid $30 million on his 3-year contract to make that catch. And it's easy to just be, a couch fan and just be like, yeah, you need to make that catch. There's no discussion about it. You have to make that catch. But I think that those drops masked, just how bad this Eagles defense is against quarterbacks, against the receivers. Josh Allen's going to take advantage of that. Josh Allen, even when he's struggling, is having these strong fantasy football games. And then also the same thing with Stephon Diggs. I think he's had 2 quiet games in a row now. I think I called that one. I think he's had 2 quiet games in a row. He's going to bounce back this week, like you mentioned, going into the bye. I think that they're going to have to get right. They got right against a good defense in the Jets. Now they can turn around. And Khalil Shakir, like you mentioned, also somebody to keep an eye on. It was on that long touchdown that he had most of his production last week, but you can't take it away from him. He is getting that higher route participation ever since I forget who got injured. I forget what it was. But anyway. Point is,
it was Dawson Knox.
Yeah, Dawson Knox.
So as soon as Dawson Knox got hurt, they stopped running as much 12 personnel, and then they started running a lot more 11 personnel.
So
with multiple.
Dawson Knox ran through my head. I thought that's who it was, but I was like, that's like a relatively insignificant injury. If you just say Dawson Knox is like it, that's what was holding up this offense from getting these extra weapons and stratifying the target share. Like it was. So yeah,
it's insane. Yeah. It's insane. And I can totally see it going back to what it was because
that would be
didn't have any idea what they were doing.
That would be beyond disappointing.
And I listen, if that happens, and I've been questioning their head coach a little bit lately, and if that happens, man, I am going to continue to do that.
It sounds like you're gonna come with something like dramatic. You're gonna be like, I'm gonna do.
Yeah, I know.
I'm just gonna continue to do what I've been doing. I was like, okay.
I can think of anything. Yeah. All right, so in case you don't want to play some of these high-end quarterbacks who have tough matchups, or in case you're looking for a streamer for this week, Gardner Minshew against the Bucks. They're allowing the 4th most fantasy quarterbacks. They're allowing the 4th most fantasy points to quarterbacks this year, and the most over the last 4 weeks. He'll have Michael Pittman. He'll have Josh Downs, hopefully healthier than he's been over the past month. Also, Saints quarterbacks, whichever Saints quarterback ends up playing this week, whether it's Derek Carr or Jameis Winston, can be in for a good game against the Falcons defense, giving up the 5th most fantasy points to quarterbacks and the 2nd most over the last 4 weeks. They won't have Michael Thomas, but they have other wide receivers who can step up behind Chris Olave and, of course, Alvin Kamara to check it down to. And then I mentioned Jordan Love as well against the Lions on Thanksgiving. They've been bottom 10 in fantasy-wise against quarterbacks for the entire season and over the course of the last 4 weeks as well. He has Jaden Reed coming on. He has Romeo Doubs, who's caught a touchdown in 4 of his last 5 games. And then you have Trevor Lawrence, who has not been a good fantasy quarterback this year. He was very solid last week in a good matchup, and now he gets Houston, who, just like the Lions, have been a bottom 10 fantasy defense against quarterbacks over the course of the season. and over the last 4 weeks. And if not mistaken, that game is a 48.5 over/under. Jacksonville is favored by 1.5 points in that one, if I'm not mistaken. Let me take a quick look at that.
Yeah.
Yep, Jacksonville's favored by 1.5 points in that one, so it's looking like a close game, potential high-scoring game. So I think Trevor Lawrence can hopefully come through.
Yeah, and it's funny if you look at Trevor Lawrence's game log, it's been like the same thing all year. He's averaging 15, 16 points a game, and he did that straight through like week 1 to 8. Then he had that down game against the 49ers. He had 4 points, but then he comes back and he has 32 points against the Titans. So it's like he balanced it out perfectly. It's perfectly balanced.
He's still like averaging. He's still averaging those 15
Yeah,
points.
that's what it is.
Because the fact that he scored 2 and then 30.
Yeah, he made up for it. He put it right in the middle. Like that is what Trevor Lawrence has been doing. He's been super consistent, but these past 2 weeks he's been inconsistent. But honestly, if you ask me, especially down the stretch, I'd rather have high ceiling, low floor Trevor Lawrence moving forward, because what he's been doing, he's been one of those players you put him in your lineup not to lose. That's what it feels like when you put him in your lineup. You're not putting him in your lineup to win, you're putting him in your lineup not to lose, and that's no way to play fantasy football. Kick this guy, look for ceiling, look for upside, and I think Trevor Lawrence, we're not going to see that type of upside again. He had 2 rushing touchdowns. I don't think that's going to happen again this season, but hopefully he can bottle up whatever he was doing. Maybe use Calvin Ridley more. I don't know if you saw the stats, like Zay Jones playing is what makes Calvin Ridley relevant. Really weird stat.
Yeah.
That's like one of those Amari Cooper home
weird.
away splits stats. Like that's the type of stat that is.
I put more weight on the home away for Amari Cooper than I do for
Zay
this
Jones.
one, where like when Zay Jones plays, like really no, it's just like how they're using Ridley. Like they're using him in different type of formations, giving him different type of routes, and it's also better matchups as well.
Yeah.
Right. That's really what it comes down to. And also, really didn't have a great matchup out of the slot against Tennessee last week. So it is what it is. This week, not as good of a matchup either for Ridley. So we'll see. We'll talk about that more on Friday. Though. Yeah. Anyway. That's going to do it for this episode, guys. We appreciate you. Have a wonderful, wonderful Thanksgiving. Enjoy your time with your family. Enjoy some football. Enjoy your friends. Enjoy fantasy football. What, did I miss an F?
No, that was the 4 F's. You got it.
Did I not miss an F?
Technically, it's 5 F's
right.
because fantasy football, 2 F's right there. But
That's true. That's true. That's true. And another F for us. That's me. We're out. Zach, take it easy, brother. Have a great Thanksgiving, and we'll be back on Friday, going over the rest of these running backs, wide receivers, and tight ends. See you later. Bye.